Welcome back to What's the Truth? We are excited today to be hosting Jeff and Debbie from Forever Families. It is my honor to join them today for this conversation about the family and in particular some of the challenges that the American family is facing and learn from them about how the Bible and in particular the gospel answers these challenges, and also learn a bit about their ministry and how some of the things they are doing come to help us out in these areas. So without further delay, Jeff, do you mind to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Yeah. Jeff McElroy. Debbie and I are both co-founders of Forever Families and happily married man to this woman for the last 41 years.
All right. 41 years. What a testimony.
Yeah.
What a legacy. Debbie, tell us, if you don't mind, your first memory of Jeff.
Well, we were actually in a group in college at Houston Baptist University, and we went and did youth programs and church programs and did some PR for the school, and he was the drummer for the group. I was the pianist and lead vocalist, and he also did some of the preaching. And I just remember that there were rehearsals that we had to have, and I decided it was really important for the pianist and the drummer to really make sure that they were on the same page. So we needed to have some rehearsals of our own. So
That's right. Jeff, do you remember that the same way?
Yeah, I do remember that she pursued me like that. I do have that recollection. Yeah.
Well,
No, I noticed her even a little bit before that. I had just come out of a long-term relationship that my parents had never been thrilled about. The girl was a believer and all of that, but they just saw some issues there that I was too in love to see. And then happened to get to know Debbie, and as I got to know her more, I thought, there is more there than what I realized that I've had in this relationship. And we really just became great friends in that group for that first year, especially. And then I did start to realize that she was the music director, and she was scheduling a lot of rehearsals just for I was like, what about the bass player and the guitarist? No, I don't think we need them. So I thought, okay, well.
It sounded like that drummer needed a bit extra practice.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. So then I started intentionally playing off beat a little bit just to make her call another rehearsal.
How about that? So fast forward a few years to Forever Families. Tell us about the beginning of this ministry. When did the Lord put it on your heart? How did you take that step of faith? And what did the early years of Forever Families look like?
Yeah, well, after college, I went to work for IBM. I was headed into a corporate law career.
I was a school teacher teaching private voice and piano.
And we were working with the students at our church there in Houston. We were some of the, lead teachers for some of the grades. And we were using all our vacation time to go and do camps and retreats for a lot of our friends that had since gone into the youth ministry after college. And it got to where we were using all our vacation time to go and to do that ministry.
And so we really started feeling called possibly into doing that kind of thing more, but we were just kind of fitting it around our work schedules.
Yeah.
And
then a deacon from our church invites us to lunch just out of the blue. And so we didn't know him real well. He went to the early service. We went to the late service, but we were a young married couple. It was a free lunch. We weren't going to pass that up.
That's right.
So over the course of the lunch, he said, we were just talking in the deacons meeting last night, and y'all's name came up. You had just led our evening services. That's been back when churches had services on Sunday night, because we're that old. And he said, we were just wondering, what are your plans for, your ministry? And I said, well, we really have just done that as opportunities came up. Our plan is we're about to go to Southern California for me to go into law school, and then I'm being transferred up to White Plains, New York to go into the legal department at IBM. Debbie's, she's still teaching, but she's probably going to go ahead and pursue the opera field like she had thought about when she got her voice major. And And I guess, maybe she'll travel around and sing, but I'll be busy pursuing that. And then he said, well, we just thought it might be important for you guys to pray about what God's plans are for your ministry. And then he got up and walked out. He
Wow.
stopped at the hostess desk and I guess paid the bill, but then he just walked out. And I learned something really important at that point. I learned there is no such thing as a free meal from a deacon. Um, and I was like, what just happened? And
I was actually excited because I had given my life to full-time Christian ministry when I was 13 at Glorieta, New Mexico, at a conference, a youth conference. And I hadn't really shared all of that with Jeff yet, but
she had just told me at some point she thought she might be a missionary
yes,
back when she was in school.
yes.
But I thought she had gotten over that. So all of a sudden it comes out that, she still had held on to that hope and that possibility. And I just didn't think any of that made sense. I was a business major, and I called her dad and I just said, hey, Dad, can you talk to Debbie? We've just gotten this rogue deacon that just kind of threw us a loop, and they're trying to talk us into full-time ministry, I think. And Debbie's going down that road, and she's a music major. They're not good at math unless it's 2 4 3 4 4 4 6 8. So could you maybe kind of talk to her? And he said, well, I hate to tell you, the deacons called us last night after the deacons meeting and asked what we thought. And we said, well, yeah, we think y'all ought to talk to them. So
Wow.
then I thought, well, he's been a Baptist his whole life. He doesn't think straight anymore. So then I reached out to my dad. Debbie had a really unique relationship with my dad. He was an alcoholic during my entire childhood, but my mom and dad fell so hard for Debbie, even before I proposed, that my dad decided he would stop drinking out of fear that if she ever saw my dad drunk, she might not marry me. And he never drank again. And so I called him and I said, can you talk to Debbie? Maybe you can get through to her. So I told him what was going on. He said, yeah, son, I told your mom when you were 18, I think he's going to be in ministry someday. Well, he never even went to church. So I was like, well, what does that mean? He's able to hear the Lord more closely than I am as an alcoholic who doesn't go to church. So that got my attention. I fought it for another 2 years or so. And then on April Fool's Day, 2 years after that, we literally surrendered to the ministry. And when I say surrendered, I carried a white flag down the aisle because I fought it as hard as I could, and I finally just had to give up. So that's what got us into Forever Families.
Yes, and we started out doing children's youth evangelism and conferences, retreats, Disciple Nows,
stadium events eventually
yes.
with the big bands. And
Let me
But
pause
you know what?
there before you dive in a little bit more to those early years and ask the why question. What is it about the American family, the 8-year-old girl or the teenage boy? What is it that demands a ministry like Forever Families?
Going into it, we didn't know. Going into it, we really thought we're going to affect that generation by sharing the gospel with them. But then, after a camp when I'd preach on Jesus being our Abba Father, kind of an intimate relationship, and I've got a football player who's just sobbing at the altar, and after talking with him, find out his dad just walked away from their family 7 years ago, and he's never returned a call or a card. And he can't understand God being a father who loves him and accepts him when his own dad doesn't. Or there was the girl that I had preached on, Jesus being our Prince of Peace.
Yeah, she was only like in 5th grade.
Yeah. And we really enjoyed doing children's camps and really thought that, I could communicate really well with them. And the little girl's counselor said that she didn't understand what my sermon was about. And that hit me pretty hard. And I said, what did she not understand? She said, well, when I started asking her questions about her home life, she talked about how her mother and father had been screaming at each other for years and then got divorced. And now they still scream at each other. They just do it through her. And she said, Jeff, that little girl had no idea what peace meant. So when you're telling her Jesus is a Prince of Peace, you would have had to have defined peace for her, and she wouldn't have had any reference for that definition.
Hmm.
And I remember we had been doing camps at that point for several years,
Yes.
and I told Debbie as we were driving back, I just said, I feel like we spent the summer pumping kids up for Jesus, and we're sending a lot of them home to what feels like hell.
Hmm.
And that's, that's the kids that end up at camp. Our kids that are just in the world, that aren't even plugged in at all to church or finding out about a relationship with Christ.
And then it really got scary when we started to realize a lot of those kids were from church families
That's
and
right.
church homes.
So,
Because they weren't living any differently at home.
so it could be, I mean, it sounds like your assessment of the American family is borderline broken, if not even worse than that in many instances. Is that a fair and accurate statement, do you think?
I think so. And not just, broken from divorce, but broken from people saying they believe something, but then not acting in a way that supports those beliefs,
In other
People have
words,
good, strong spiritual opinions, but I don't know that the gospel has become value to them yet or not, because we state our opinions, but we live our values. And we didn't see a lot of the gospel. If it was valued, we didn't see it being lived out in the homes of these kids.
yeah, it sounds like uh, we can understand this reality for a non-Christian family, but for a family that goes to church on Sundays who claims the name of Christ, it's unusual, but it sounds like it is the reality that in many of these homes, brokenness is a norm, and bickering and fighting and all of those things are much more common than we may realize.
Yes.
Yeah, right,
And just it being such the norm that you know the way you should be living. Maybe you even know some verses about the way you should be living, but you choose not to. Now with our marriage ministry that grew out of that love for kids, we see couples all the time, and we talk to them about how they could make their marriage better. And most of them already know how they could. They just don't want to do what it would take. They don't want to really let Jesus change them from the inside out. And so it does take work to live the Christian values out in your home.
And I think that when they do think about doing that, they're so focused on their spouse as the source of hope and their source of security, that it feels too vulnerable to do the things that Scripture's calling them to do. So we're constantly having to redirect them to say, look, your hope and your security isn't going to come from your spouse. It's coming out of you trusting God enough to surrender to Him and just to do what He's calling you to do towards your spouse, regardless of how your spouse is treating you. Would God be big enough to be able to bless that and to provide what you need through that, rather than you relying on your spouse for it? So really, I think that the only difference that we see way too often in families and marriages inside a church versus unchurched marriages is the families in church know enough of the Bible to use it as a weapon, but not to rely on it as a way through.
Well said.
And so they create even deeper wounds, because now they're not just creating relational wounds between the two of them, but they can then create spiritual wounds between the two of them and between their spouse and the Lord.
Yeah, well said. It's another sad reality of this is that it makes the gospel less attractive for the children that are looking on.
That's right.
And it makes the hope of Christ much less appealing for the neighbor that lives across the street or the coworker that shares a cubicle. And that's maybe not the worst tragedy of it all, but it is certainly a reality when people see someone who claims to follow Jesus have very little or no difference in the way they live at home and the way they talk to their spouse. What a tragedy.
Yeah, and to even play that out some more, Stephen, as we began, since we've been doing this now for over 30 years, we've seen the kids who grew up in the divorce culture. And we watched them see their front door of their home become a revolving door as mom and dad would get divorced. And rather than going to the Lord for the healing from that, they'd find another person to heal the wounds of the person before them. And then surprisingly, that wouldn't go well. And then they might go into their third or fourth or fifth marriage. And each time telling the kid, no, I really love this person. This person, open your heart up to them. Be vulnerable to them because I'm being vulnerable to them. And then as that next marriage falls down, eventually that kid just starts to put one brick on top of the other to build a wall around their heart from this concept of love. And they then begin to believe that lasting love must be a fairy tale. It must be something that used to happen, but isn't a contemporary idea. And because they no longer believe in lasting love, then how do they believe in God when we say that God is love?
Because for a child, his or her image of God is oftentimes parallel, in my opinion, to his or her image of mom or dad. Because
That's right.
exactly, yeah. What did COVID do to the American family? What are some effects, whether for the better or for the worse, that COVID had on marriages and home life?
I think one of the things it did was it made people even more isolated. We already had that kind of happening because of all the technology. Our phones, our computers. Everybody has their own TV in their room. All of those kind of things. Used to you had was called a living room or a family room, and now everybody just has their rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And during COVID, I think not having regular times of worship with other people, not having other people that you just got out of the practice of being in relationship with
Mm-hmm.
groups of people.
Yeah.
I think people have had to learn it again, and especially the youth of that day. I mean, we're still seeing how COVID has affected children and youth, and that they don't exactly know how to do relationships.
Mm-hmm.
They're having to learn it in a new way.
Yeah.
But especially, I think we as adults just got to where we were like, you know what? I think I can do this thing called life on my own.
Mm-hmm.
We can just be at home all the time and get our food delivered to us, and I don't even have to see people at the grocery store if I don't want to.
Yeah.
And so then it makes you even less likely to care about other people, to want to share the gospel, to want to show that you're different. And so I think it took some things from us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're still a good decade away, if not maybe even two, to seeing the full impact of COVID, because COVID wasn't the beginning of the issue. Like Debbie said, we were already living in silos in most homes. Most homes weren't living in a connected existence with each other in families. But because you have this failure of relationships, and now you have this distrust of God, because God is love and love isn't enough. I know the Bible says love never fails, but that's not how I saw it in my home, the kid
Mm-hmm.
thinks.
Mm-hmm.
The kids then have a relational anxiety. We see it a lot of times when we have somebody who's gone through our Prepare to Last, which is like a premarital course for seriously dating or nearly wed or newlywed couples. There's something that we call now engagement anxiety, where kids may decide or adults may decide, okay, I want to get married. And they will pop the question and they'll put up all the pictures on Instagram that she said yes. And then we'll get calls or emails within 24 hours from one or both of them in complete panic that they have now committed to this concept that they don't even know if they believe in anymore.
Wow.
And we've had to walk these folks through how to manage anxiety all the way to the altar sometimes.
Wow.
And that's the reason now you start to see kids really who have grown up relating to other people through the internet rather than face to face. We're seeing now in Gen Z, I don't know if you saw this study that was this poll that was just published this last week, where they polled 2,000 Gen Zers who are now all adults. And they said, how many of you think you could have a deep emotional bond with an AI? And 83% said they thought they could, and that they would feel safer doing that than they would with another human. And we see it now playing out on our college campuses where you've got this cancel culture and everybody's saying, why are these kids acting this way? Well, it's because a lot of them grew up in divorced homes or in homes where maybe mom and dad didn't get divorced, but they were at each other all the time and they never saw resolution. They never saw um, an apology from mom and dad. They saw them go all the way to the courthouse and try to cancel the other one out. So those are the only tools they got in their toolbox. And now they're realizing that's not enough.
Either that or it's exactly the opposite, where they make relationships very quickly and don't get to know each other very well, like in a lot of online relationships. And they think they know each other. They even start calling each other girlfriend and boyfriend, and they've never even gone out on a date. And so it just, relationships are something that we feel like we have to work harder at with today's teens and young adults and people who are young marrieds, because they're not relationally equipped very well.
Yeah, it's shocking when you consider that study. 83%, if I'm not mistaken, of Gen Zers said they could marry an AI if it was legally permissible, and it's just unreal to think about the AI relationship as it's been coined, I think, and all that could imagine with. Well, let's shift gears. What is the answer? What is the solution? What do we do with all of these problems and brokenness around us?
Well, we know the answer is Jesus, but it's
Jesus in an everyday, real way in your house.
Yeah, it's really coming back to the one who created us, to one who created relationship, and to going all the way back to the garden and saying, what was the purpose of relationships anyway? What was the purpose of marriage? It wasn't just so that two people could show the world they loved each other. It was so that it could reflect the gospel. There would be a relationship that would, a way for God to show every generation before and after Christ was on the earth what the gospel relationship is like. And so that's the reason marriage is between a man and a woman. God needed to create man and his polar opposite, woman, because that's how the gospel story starts. There is a holy God and a sinful man, polar opposites, that could only come together through grace. The same way a husband and wife could only become one is through the grace of Jesus. And then we have to talk about, and we've got to get better in our churches of really, I guess, offering more relationship skills in our discipleship classes, because we say Christianity is a relationship, but we're saying that to people who don't know how to do relationships. Mm-hmm. And so it is really trying to help our folks learn, how do I take the Bible? It's great that we're at God's house this Sunday morning, but how do we take this home so that it can truly become God's house as well? How do I learn to live with the grace of Christ? How do I learn to take the words of the gospel and just work it into our everyday marriage, into our everyday parenting and relationships, so that our kids leave our home saying, well, I know the gospel is real because I saw it. I saw it in person, lived out in front of me.
Yeah, and just learning in our own families, how do we live it out? We learn to give each other grace. We teach each other by example to be the first to forgive. We ask our kids for forgiveness when we've messed up. We, just the everyday, and it would be awesome to be able to also do Bible studies together and to have some devotionals. But I'm talking about the everyday living it out, doing the things that Jesus wants us to do, even just with the people who are in our own home.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Well
we
said.
get so afraid that we've got to surrender to each other that it gets in the way of us remembering this isn't about that. It's really about, in this fight with my spouse, how can I disconnect from that? And how can I surrender to the Lord in this? So that when I go back in there, I'm more surrendered to Him. It's not about surrendering to her or to your spouse, but how do I go back in more surrendered to the Lord? What does that look like? And how do my kids learn what surrender looks like as they're watching me?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, kids want to 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 be known at school. They want to fit in, but it's our responsibility as parents to help them with boundaries. We need to be careful about how they're using their computers and online resources and all of those kind of things. And as youth today, it's okay to be different, to be the one that has maybe some different rules or different um, boundaries, that kind of thing. Being able to explain to your friends why you choose not to do some of the things that maybe the world says is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Standing out for good things rather than being the weird ones, right?
Absolutely. So Jeff and Debbie, let's suppose there's a guy listening to this and he wants to take one nugget away, one practical step, and there's a lady listening that wants to do the same thing. What's a small, easy, but powerful and effective win that someone could see it become a reality in their home through the strength and power of the Holy Spirit? What is that one thing that a guy, Jeff, could take and put to practice immediately? And Debbie, what is something that a lady could do?
I say to guys all the time that most men shy away from being the spiritual leader in their homes because they feel like that's impending failure. They think of it like back in the days when we used to have the tithing envelopes and you checked the box that you read your Bible, you did your Sunday school lesson, you showed up in church, you gave your offering. And I think most men have this high bar set in their minds. And sometimes the church communicates this. Sometimes their wife communicates this, that it's been defined a certain way that you have to do all of those things on a regular basis. And many men don't feel like they have the capability of being able to do that or sustain it. And so they avoid it. And what I try to tell men is, look, go with the fact that you feel like you're going to fail. I'm okay. If that's what you feel like is going to happen, then let's go with that. When you failed as a spiritual leader, maybe you came home and you talked to your wife in a way that wasn't loving to her.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you lashed out. Maybe you lied about something, and maybe she has uncovered something that you've been hiding from her. Then admit that there's failure there. Just be humble and
Mm-hmm.
apologize.
Mm-hmm.
Own it.
Yeah, nothing
That's
wrong with.
spiritual leadership.
Yeah, exactly. I had a basketball coach tell me once that if you're always in practice, if you're always able to control the basketball, you're probably not pushing yourselves hard enough. And I think as we apply that into the life of into our lives and marriages, if we're always perfect in everything that we do, then we're probably not being honest with ourselves for one thing, but we're also probably not taking the courage and the steps of faith that we ought to. So well said. Thank you very much. Debbie, how about a lady? What could she do?
I think one of the things that I would say is to really strive to find peace and peaceful moments, and to make the house a place of peace. I was for a long time, and I'm not proud to say it, but for probably 3 or 4 years, I was a screaming mama. And my house was not a place of peace. I did what I saw growing up and what I heard growing up, but I finally realized, you know what, I'm a big girl now. I'm an adult. This is not godly, the way that I'm being with my children. And so I had to learn new ways of communicating. I had to learn where my anger was coming from. I had to work through some spiritual and emotional work. And I wanted my house to be a place of peace. And I realized that I was the one that was keeping that from happening. So I did a lot of work to change that around. And I remember our son had gone over to a friend's house to spend the night. He was, probably in elementary school and early elementary. And he
So
came
it's like,
home.
what, 2 years down the road after all of
Yeah,
that?
he came home and he told me he didn't want to go back over there and spend the night again. And I said, why? What was wrong? And he said, his mom yelled the whole time. And I said, oh, babe, we don't know what's happening with her. Maybe we just need to pray for her. Maybe she's having a hard time. Maybe she's just upset or she's tired. But you remember when Mama used to yell all the time, right? And he looked straight at me and said, nope. And I just,
Wow.
whew.
Praise God for his forgiveness.
Exactly.
Yes.
God's forgiveness and the fact that he can erase things
Yes,
when we are willing to take them to him and say, change me, Lord.
absolutely.
So in little ways that can turn into big things for your family.
Absolutely.
I believe that in our homes that I am supposed to be the one to make this a welcoming, peaceful place.
Well said.
And I'm glad that my children, as adults with their own children now, can come here, and that's what it is.
Well said. Well, Jeff and Debbie, thank you so much for sharing vulnerably. Forever Families is coming to Wolsey Baptist Church, and it's going to come in the form of love and laughter. You're going to lead it. Can you give a sneak peek at what's going to happen that night at Love and Laughter?
Yeah, first of all, we're going to laugh a lot. It's a date night, and we all get so serious and so overwhelmed with jobs and careers and kids and home that sometimes just laughing together. There's some good research that shows that if a couple laughs together at the same time, that the dopamine release from that can be as impactful as a good counseling session. So we're going to save them a couple $100 of counseling sessions, and we're going to laugh a bunch. And then we're going to talk about 4 paradigm shifts that if they made these 4 changes or any one of these 4 changes in their relationship, that it could literally impact it overnight, and that it could be the one thing that separates them to be strong marriages over struggling marriages.
It's going to be a fun night. It sounds like a night no one wants to miss.
We're looking forward to it. We're
Absolutely.
really honored that you guys are having us in.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. Thank you for your investment in families all across this country, and I'm confident the reach of your ministry goes far beyond just this country and to the ends of the earth. And so thank you for giving your lives, and thanks for obeying that call to ministry, and ultimately thanks to God for bringing the two of you together and using you as he had.